But it wasn't written by Hirsch. If he's a French patriot, he didn't write it, because it gives information to Germany. And if he's a German spy, he didn't write it, well, because it doesn't give information to Germany.
You mean the information is wrong?
Wrong. And wrong exactly where Dr. Hirsch would have been right.
Welcome to Meteoread Audiobooks, your best companion, where classic tales are brought to life like never before. Dr. Hirsch, a mild-mannered physician, becomes the target of Dubosk, a zealous patriot who accuses him of aiding the Germans during the war. As the story unfolds, Father Brown, with his profound understanding of human nature, investigates the accusations and the motivations behind them. You are listening to the Duel of Dr. Hirsch, a masterful mystery by G.K. Chesterton, first published in 1914 as part of his Father Brown series. Think of it as a Netflix show without the visuals. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let the mystery sweep you off your feet. The truth hides in plain sight.
Monsieur Maurice Brun and Monsieur Armand Armagnac were crossing the sunlit Champs-Élysées with a kind of vivacious respectability. They were both short, brisk and bold. They both had black beards that did not seem to belong to their faces, after the strange French fashion which makes real hair look like artificial. Monsieur Brun had a dark wedge of beard apparently affixed under his lower lip. Monsieur Armagnac, by way of a change, had two beards, one sticking out from each corner of his emphatic chin. They were both young. They were both atheists, with a depressing fixity of outlook, but great mobility of exposition. They were both pupils of the great Dr. Hirsch, scientist, publicist, and moralist. Monsieur Brun had become prominent by his proposal that the common expression adieu should be obliterated from all the French classics, and a slight fine imposed for its use in private life.
Then,
Maurice Brun said,
the very name of your imagined God will have echoed for the last time in the ear of man.
Monsieur Armagnac specialized in resisting militarism, advocating the Marseillaise chorus be changed from aux armes, citoyens, to aux grèves, citoyens. His anti-militarism, however, was distinctly Gallic. An eminent English Quaker visiting to discuss global disarmament was appalled by Armagnac's suggestion that soldiers begin by shooting their officers. The two men differed greatly from their philosophical leader, Dr. Hirsch. Though a product of triumphant French education, Hirsch was mild, dreamy and humane, resembling a German more than a Frenchman. This peaceful demeanour, while admired, subtly irritated his fiery Gaulish colleagues. Yet, to their party across Europe, Paul Hirsch was a saint of science. His daring cosmic theories bolstered his austere and somewhat frigid morality, giving him a stature akin to Darwin blended with Tolstoy. Not an anarchist nor anti-patriot, his evolutionary views on disarmament earned trust from the Republican government. His latest discovery, a noiseless explosive, was closely guarded by authorities. Hirsch's house, in a leafy street near the Élysée, boasted white and green blinds and a green iron balcony overlooking a courtyard lively with shrubs and tiles. There the two Frenchmen arrived, deep in animated conversation. The door was opened by Simon, the doctor's old servant, whose black suit, spectacles and confidential demeanour gave him a scholarly air. In contrast, Dr. Hirsch, with his slight frame and bulbous head, seemed a mere forked radish. With all the gravity of a great physician handling a prescription, Simon handed a letter to Monsieur Armagnac. That gentleman ripped it up with a racial impatience and rapidly read the following. I cannot come down to speak to you. There is a man in this house whom I refuse to meet. He is a chauvinist officer, Dubosk. He's sitting on the stairs. He has been kicking the furniture about in all the other rooms. I have locked myself in my study opposite that cafe. If you love me, go over to the cafe and wait at one of the tables outside. I will try to send him over to you. I want you to answer him and deal with him. I cannot meet him myself. I cannot. I will not. There is going to be another Dreyfus case. P. Hirsch. Monsieur Armagnac looked at Monsieur Brun. Monsieur Brun borrowed the letter, read it, and looked at Monsieur Armagnac. Then both betook themselves briskly to one of the little tables under the chestnuts opposite, where they procured 2 tall glasses of horrible green absinthe, which they could drink apparently in any weather and at any time. Otherwise the cafe seemed empty, except for one soldier drinking coffee at one table, and at another a large man drinking a small syrup and a priest drinking nothing. Maurice Brune said,
Of course we must help the master in every way, but...
There was an abrupt silence, and Armagnac said,
He may have excellent reasons for not meeting the man himself, but...
Before either could complete a sentence, it was clear the invader had been expelled from the house opposite. The shrubs under the archway swayed and parted as the unwelcome guest was shot out like a cannonball. He was a sturdy figure in a small tilted Tyrolean hat, his broad shoulders contrasting with his neat active legs in knee breeches and knitted stockings. His brown face had bright restless eyes, dark hair stiffly brushed back, and a large black moustache like a bison's horns. His strong head, typically paired with a bull neck, was hidden by a large coloured scarf, swathed around his ears and falling inside his jacket like a fancy waistcoat. The scarf, in dark red, old gold and purple, appeared to be of Oriental origin. The man had a slightly barbaric air, more like a Hungarian squire than a French officer. However, his French was unmistakably native, and his patriotism, though sincere, was impulsive to the point of absurdity. His first act when he burst out of the archway was to call in a clarion voice down the street,
Are there any Frenchmen here?
as if he were calling for Christians in Mecca. Armagnac and Brune instantly stood up, but they were too late. Men were already running from the street corners. There was a small but ever-clustering crowd. With the prompt French instinct for the politics of the street, the man with the black moustache had already run across to a corner of the cafe, sprung on one of the tables, and seizing a branch of chestnut to steady himself, shouted as Camille Desmoulins once shouted when he scattered the oak leaves among the populace.
Frenchmen,
He volleyed.
I cannot speak. God help me. That is why I am speaking. The fellows in their filthy parliaments who learn to speak also learn to be silent. Silent as that spy cowering in the house opposite. Silent as he is when I beat on his bedroom door. Silent as he is now, though he hears my voice across this street and shakes where he sits. Oh, they can be silent, eloquently, the politicians. But the time has come when we that cannot speak must speak. You are betrayed to the Prussians, betrayed at this moment, betrayed by that man. I am Jules Dubosc, Colonel of Artillery, Belfort. We caught a German spy in the Vosges yesterday, and a paper was found on him, a paper I hold in my hand. Oh, they tried to hush it up, but I took it direct to the man who wrote it, the man in that house. It is in his hand. It is signed with his initials. It is a direction for finding the secret of this new noiseless powder. Hirsch invented it. Hirsch wrote this note about it. This note is in German and was found in a German's pocket. Tell the man the formula for powder is in grey envelope in first drawer to the left of Secretary's desk. War Office in red ink. He must be careful. P.H.
He rattled short sentences like a quick-firing gun, but he was plainly the sort of man who is either mad or right. The mass of the crowd was nationalist, and already in threatening uproar, and a minority of equally angry intellectuals led by Armagnac and Brune only made the majority more militant.
If this is a military secret, why do you yell about it in the street?
Shouted Brune.
I will tell you why I do. I went to this man in straight and civil style. If he had any explanation, it could have been given in complete confidence. He refuses to explain. He refers me to two strangers in a cafe as to two flunkies. He has thrown me out of the house, but I am going back into it with the people of Paris behind me.
A shout seemed to shake the very facade of mansions, and two stones flew, one breaking a window above the balcony. The indignant colonel plunged once more under the archway and was heard crying and thundering inside. Every instant the human sea grew wider and wider. It surged up against the rails and steps of the traitor's house. It was already certain that the place would be burst into like the Bastille, when the broken French window opened and Dr. Hirsch came out on the balcony. For an instant the fury half turned to laughter, for he was an absurd figure in such a scene. His long bare neck and sloping shoulders were the shape of a champagne bottle, but that was the only festive thing about him, monsieur. His coat hung on him as on a peg. He wore his carrot-coloured hair long and weedy. His cheeks and chin were fully fringed with one of those irritating beards that begin far from the mouth. He was very pale, and he wore blue spectacles. Livid as he was, he spoke with a sort of prim decision, so that the mob fell silent in the middle of his third sentence.
There is only two things to say to you now. The first is to my foes, the second to my friends. To my foes I say, it is true I will not meet Monsieur Dubosc, though he is storming outside this very room. It is true I have asked 2 other men to confront him for me, and I will tell you why. Because I will not and must not see him, because it would be against all rules of dignity and honor to see him. Before I am triumphantly cleared before a court, there is another arbitration this gentleman owes me as a gentleman, and in referring him to my seconds, I am strictly—
Armagnac and Brun were waving their hats wildly, and even the doctor's enemies roared applause at this unexpected defiance. Once more, a few sentences were inaudible, but they could hear him say,
To my friends, I myself should always prefer weapons purely intellectual, and to these an evolved humanity will certainly confine itself. But our own most precious truth is the fundamental force of matter and heredity. My books are successful, my theories are unrefuted, but I suffer in politics from a prejudice almost physical in the French. I cannot speak like Clemenceau and Déroulède, for their words are like echoes of their pistols. The French ask for a duelist as the English ask for a sportsman. Well, I give my proofs. I will pay this barbaric bribe and then go back to reason for the rest of my life.
2 men were instantly found in the crowd itself to offer their services to Colonel Dubosc, who came out presently, satisfied. One was the common soldier with the coffee, who said simply,
I will act for you, sir. I am the Duc de Valognes.
The other was the big man, whom his friend the priest sought at first to dissuade, and then walked away alone. In the early evening, a light dinner was spread at the back of the Café Charlemagne. Though unroofed by glass or plaster, the guests sat beneath a delicate roof of leaves, as ornamental trees stood thick around the tables, giving a dim, orchard-like feel. At one central table, a stumpy little priest sat in solitude, enjoying a pile of whitebait with great seriousness. His daily life being plain, he had a taste for sudden, isolated luxuries, an abstemious epicure. He did not look up from his plate surrounded by red pepper, lemons, brown bread and butter, until a tall shadow fell across it, and his friend Flambeau sat down opposite. Flambeau was gloomy. He said,
I'm afraid I must chuck this business. I'm all on the side of the French soldiers like Dubosc, and I'm all against the French atheists like Hirsch. But it seems to me in this case we've made a mistake. The Duke and I thought it as well to investigate the charge, and I must say I'm glad we did.
Is the paper a forgery then?
asked the priest.
That's just the odd thing. It's exactly like Hirsch's writing, and nobody can point out any mistake in it. But it wasn't written by Hirsch. If he's a French patriot, he didn't write it, because it gives information to Germany. And if he's a German spy, he didn't write it, well, because it doesn't give information to Germany.
You mean the information is wrong?
Wrong. And wrong exactly where Dr. Hirsch would have been right, about the hiding place of his own secret formula in his own official department. By favour of Hirsch and the authorities, the Duke and I have actually been allowed to inspect the secret drawer at the War Office where the Hirsch formula is kept. We are the only people who have ever known it, except the inventor himself and the Minister for War. But the Minister permitted it to save Hirsch from fighting. After that, we really can't support Dubosc if his revelation is a mare's nest.
And it is?
It is a clumsy forgery by somebody who knew nothing of the real hiding place. It says the paper is in the cupboard on the right of the secretary's desk. As a fact, the cupboard with the secret drawer is some way to the left of the desk. It says the grey envelope contains a long document written in red ink. It isn't written in red ink, but in ordinary black ink. It's manifestly absurd to say that Hirsch can have made a mistake about a paper that nobody knew of but himself, or can have tried to help a foreign thief by telling him to fumble in the wrong drawer. I think we must chuck it up and apologise to old Carrots.
Father Brown seemed to cogitate. He lifted a little whitebait on his fork.
You are sure the grey envelope was in the left cupboard?
Positive. The grey envelope, it was a white envelope really, was...
What?
Father Brown put down the small silver fish in the fork and stared across at his companion.
Well, what?
It was not grey. Flambeau, you frighten me.
What the deuce are you frightened of?
I'm frightened of a white envelope. If it had only just been grey. Hang it all, it might as well have been grey. But if it was white, the whole business is black. The doctor has been dabbling in some of the old brimstone after all.
But I tell you, he couldn't have written such a note. The note is utterly wrong about the facts. And innocent or guilty, Dr. Hirsch knew all about the facts.
The man who wrote that note knew all about the facts. He could never have got them so wrong without knowing about them. You have to know an awful lot to be wrong on every subject, like the devil.
Do you mean...
I mean, a man telling lies on chance would have told some of the truth.
Hey, you still there? Sorry for jumping in while you're listening. Just wanted to quickly mention that we publish stories like this every Sunday. If you're enjoying it, consider subscribing for more. Happy listening.
Suppose someone sent you to find a house with a green door and a blue blind, with a front garden but no back garden, with a dog but no cat, and where they drank coffee but not tea. You would say, if you found no such house, that it was all made up. But I say no. I say if you found a house where the door was blue and the blind green, where there was a back garden and no front garden, where cats were common and dogs instantly shot, where tea was drunk in quarts and coffee forbidden, then you would know you had found the house. The man must have known that particular house to be so accurately inaccurate.
But what could it mean?
I can't conceive. I don't understand this Hirsch affair at all. As long as it was only the left drawer instead of the right, and red ink instead of black, I thought it must be the chance blunders of a forger, as you say. But 3 is a mystical number. It finishes things. It finishes this, that the direction about the drawer, the colour of ink, the colour of envelope, should none of them be right by accident, that can't be a coincidence. It wasn't.
What was it then? Treason?
I don't know that either. The only thing I can think of, well, I never understood that Dreyfus case. I can always grasp moral evidence easier than the other sorts. I go by a man's eyes and voice, don't you know, and whether his family seems happy, and by what subjects he chooses and avoids. Well, I was puzzled in the Dreyfus case, not by the horrible things imputed both ways. I know, though it's not modern to say so, that human nature in the highest places is still capable of being Cenci or Borgia. No. What puzzled me was the sincerity of both parties. I don't mean the political parties. The rank and file are always roughly honest, and often duped. I mean the persons of the play. I mean the conspirators, if they were conspirators. I mean the traitor, if he was a traitor. I mean the men who must have known the truth. Now Dreyfus went on like a man who knew he was a wronged man. And yet the French statesmen and soldiers went on as if they knew he wasn't a wronged man, but simply a wrong-un. I don't mean they behaved well. I mean they behaved as if they were sure. I can't describe these things, I know what I mean,
answered Brown, with a face of blank bewilderment.
I wish I did. And what is it to do with old Hirsch?
Suppose a person in a position of trust began to give the enemy information, because it was false information. Suppose he even thought he was saving his country by misleading the foreigner. Suppose this brought him into spy circles, and little loans were made to him, and little ties tied onto him. Suppose he kept up his contradictory position in a confused way by never telling the foreign spies the truth, but letting it more and more be guessed. The better part of him, what was left of it, would still say, I have not helped the enemy. I said it was the left drawer. The meaner part of him would already be saying, but they may have the sense to see that means the right. I think it is psychologically possible, in an enlightened age, you know.
It may be psychologically possible, and it certainly would explain Dreyfus being certain he was wronged and his judges being sure he was guilty. But it won't wash historically because Dreyfus's document, if it was his document, was literally correct.
I wasn't thinking of Dreyfus.
Silence had sunk around them with the emptying of the tables. It was already late, though the sunlight still clung to everything, as if accidentally entangled in the trees. In the stillness, Flambeau shifted his seat sharply, making an isolated and echoing noise, and threw his elbow over the angle of it.
Well, if Hirsch is not better than a timid treasonmonger...
You mustn't be too hard on them. It's not entirely their fault, but they have no instincts. I mean those things that make a woman refuse to dance with a man, or a man to touch an investment. They've been taught that it's all a matter of degree.
Anyhow, he's not a patch on my principle, and I shall go through with it. Old Dubosk may be a bit mad, but he's a sort of patriot after all.
Father Brown continued to consume whitebait. Something in the stolid way he did so caused Flambeau's fierce black eyes to ramble over his companion afresh.
What's the matter with you? Duboska's all right in that way. You don't doubt him?
My friend, I doubt everything,
said the small priest, laying down his knife and fork in a kind of cold despair.
Everything, I mean, that has happened today. I doubt the whole story, though it has been acted before my face. I doubt every sight that my eyes have seen since morning. There is something in this business quite different from the ordinary police mystery where one man is more or less lying and the other man more or less telling the truth. Here both men. Well, I've told you the only theory I can think of that could satisfy anybody. It doesn't satisfy me.
Nor me either,
replied Flambeau, frowning, while the other went on eating fish with an air of entire resignation.
If all you can suggest is that notion of a message conveyed by contraries, I call it uncommonly clever, but, well, what would you call it?
I should call it thin. I should call it uncommonly thin. But that's the queer thing about the whole business. The lie is like a schoolboy's. There are only 3 versions, Dubosk's and Hirsch's and that fancy of mine. Either that note was written by a French officer to ruin a French official, or it was written by the French official to help German officers, or it was written by the French official to mislead German officers. Very well. You'd expect a secret paper passing between such people, officials or officers, to look quite different from that. You'd expect probably a cipher, certainly abbreviations, most certainly scientific and strictly professional terms. But this thing's elaborately simple, like a penny dreadful. In the purple grotto you will find the golden casket. It looks as if it were meant to be seen through at once.
Almost before they could take it, in a short figure in French uniform had walked up to their table like the wind and sat down with a sort of thump.
I have extraordinary news,
said the Duc de Valognes.
I have just come from this colonel of ours. He is packing up to leave the country and he asks us to make his excuses sur le terrain.
What? Apologise?
Yes. Then and there, before everybody, when the swords are drawn. And you and I have to do it while he is leaving the country.
But what can this mean? He can't be afraid of that little Hirsch. Confound it! Nobody could be afraid of Hirsch.
I believe it's some plot of the Jews and Freemasons. It's meant to work up glory for Hirsch.
The face of Father Brown was commonplace, but curiously contented. It could shine with ignorance as well as with knowledge. But there was always one flash when the foolish mask fell, and the wise mask fitted itself in its place. And Flambeau, who knew his friend, knew that his friend had suddenly understood. Brown said nothing, but finished his plate of fish.
Where did you last see our precious colonel?
He's round at the Hotel St. Louis by the Élysée, where we drove with him. He's packing up, I tell you.
Will he be there still, do you think?
I don't think he can get away yet. He's packing to go a long journey.
No. For a very short journey,
said Father Brown, quite simply, but suddenly standing up.
For one of the shortest, in fact. But we may still be in time to catch him if we go there in a motor cab.
Nothing more could be got out of him until the cab swept round the corner by the Hotel St. Louis, where they got out, and he led the party up a side lane already in deep shadow with the growing dusk. Once, when the Duke impatiently asked whether Hirsch was guilty of treason or not, he answered rather absently,
No, only of ambition, like Caesar. He lives a very lonely life. He has had to do everything for himself.
Well, if he's ambitious, he ought to be satisfied now. All Paris will cheer him now that our cursed colonel has turned tail.
Don't talk so loud, your cursed colonel is just in front.
The other two started and shrank farther back into the shadow of the wall, for the sturdy figure of their runaway principal could indeed be seen shuffling along in the twilight in front, a bag in each hand. He looked much the same as when they first saw him, except that he had changed his picturesque mountaineering knickers for a conventional pair of trousers. It was clear he was already escaping from the hotel. The lane they followed was one of those that seem like the back of things, resembling the wrong side of stage scenery. A dull, continuous wall lined one side, interrupted by dirt-stained doors, all shut and featureless except for chalk scribbles from passing gamins. The tops of rather depressing evergreens occasionally rose above the wall, and beyond them, in the grey-purple twilight, loomed the backs of tall Parisian terraces, close yet as inaccessible as marble mountains. On the opposite side ran the high gilt railings of a sombre park. Flambeau was looking round him in rather a weird way.
Do you know, there is something about this place that...
Hello? That fellow's disappeared. Vanished, like a blasted fairy.
He has a key. He's only gone into one of these garden doors.
And as he spoke, they heard one of the dull wooden doors close again with a click in front of them. Flambeau strode up to the door, thus shut almost in his face, and stood in front of it for a moment, biting his black moustache in a fury of curiosity. Then he threw up his long arms and swung himself aloft like a monkey, and stood on the top of the wall, his enormous figure dark against the purple sky, like the dark treetops. The Duke looked at the priest.
Dubosc's escape is more elaborate than we thought, but I suppose he is escaping from France.
He is escaping from everywhere.
Valogne's eyes brightened, but his voice sank.
Do you mean suicide?
You will not find his body.
A kind of cry came from Flambeau on the wall above.
Mon Dieu, I know what this place is now. Why, it's the back of the street where old Hirsch lives. I thought I could recognize the back of a house as well as the back of a man.
And Dubosc has gone in there,
cried the Duke, smiting his hip.
Why, they'll meet after all.
And with sudden Gallic vivacity, he hopped up on the wall beside Flambeau and sat there positively kicking his legs with excitement. The priest alone remained below, leaning against the wall, with his back to the whole theatre of events, and looking wistfully across to the park palings and the twinkling twilit trees. The Duke, however stimulated, had the instincts of an aristocrat, and desired rather to stare at the house than to spy on it. But Flambeau, who had the instincts of a burglar and a detective, had already swung himself from the wall into the fork of a straggling tree, from which he could crawl quite close to the only illuminated window in the back of the high dark house. A red blind had been pulled down over the light, but pulled crookedly, so that it gaped on one side, and by risking his neck along a branch that looked as treacherous as a twig, Flambeau could just see Colonel Dubosc walking about in a brilliantly lighted and luxurious bedroom. But close as Flambeau was to the house, he heard the words of his colleagues by the wall, and repeated them in a low voice.
Yes, they will meet now after all.
They will never meet. Hirsch was right when he said that in such an affair the principals must not meet. Have you read a queer psychological story by Henry James of two persons who so perpetually missed meeting each other by accident that they began to feel quite frightened of each other and to think it was fate? This is something of the kind, but more curious.
There are people in Paris who will cure them of such morbid fancies. They will jolly well have to meet if we capture them and force them to fight.
They will not meet on the day of judgment. If God Almighty held the truncheon of the lists, if St. Michael blew the trumpet for the swords to cross, even then, if one of them stood ready, the other would not come.
Oh, what does all this mysticism mean? Why on earth shouldn't they meet like other people?
They are the opposite of each other. They contradict each other. They cancel out, so to speak.
He continued gazing at the darkening trees, but Valogne turned sharply at a muffled exclamation from Flambeau. Peering into the lighted room, Flambeau had seen the colonel take off his coat. At first, it seemed like preparation for a fight, but the bulky chest and shoulders were mere padding and came off with the coat. In his shirt and trousers, Dubosc was a slender man who calmly crossed to the bathroom. After washing his face and hands, he dried them, turning so the light illuminated his features. His brown complexion and thick moustache were gone. Clean-shaven and pale, only his sharp, hawk-like eyes remained. Under the wall, Father Brown was going on in heavy meditation, as if to himself.
It is all just like what I was saying to Flambeau. These opposites won't do, they don't work, they don't fight. If it's white instead of black, and solid instead of liquid, and so on all along the line, then there's something wrong, monsieur, there's something wrong. One of these men is fair and the other dark, one stout and the other slim, one strong and the other weak. One has a moustache and no beard, so you can't see his mouth. The other has a beard and no moustache, so you can't see his chin. One has hair cropped to his skull, but a scarf to hide his neck. The other has low shirt collars, but long hair to bide his skull. It's all too neat and correct, monsieur, and there's something wrong. Things made so opposite are things that cannot quarrel. Wherever the one sticks out, the other sinks in, like a face and a mask, like a lock and a key.
Flambeau was peering into the house with a visage as white as a sheet. The occupant of the room was standing with his back to him, but in front of a looking glass, and had already fitted round his face a sort of framework of rank red hair, hanging disordered from the head, and clinging round the jaws and chin while leaving the mocking mouth uncovered. Seen thus in the glass, the white face looked like the face of Judas laughing horribly, and surrounded by capering flames of hell. For a spasm, Flambeau saw the fierce red-brown eyes dancing. Then they were covered with a pair of blue spectacles. Slipping on a loose black coat, the figure vanished towards the front of the house. A few moments later, a roar of popular applause from the street beyond announced that Dr. Hirsch had once more appeared upon the balcony.